Hi everyone, and welcome to my guide for the Pen RF Rogue, the penetrating shot rapid fire combo for Diablo 4 Season 3. This is probably the most highly anticipated rogue build of the season. The ranged rogues rule supreme this time. We have major buffs to the precision key passive that allows rogues to actually use that and be successful. And on top of this, we got some buffs to some of the bows, especially the Sky Hunter unique, that makes ranged rogues even better. Plus a few other buffs and changes that just overall buff this setup. So here's some footage that you can see from me playing this in Season 2 without the Tables Will bug in this case. And it was already slicing through those T100 nightmare dungeons, and it's about to get much better. So I'm gonna walk you through the setup. This is definitely the build that I'm most excited for right now on the Rogue, to just blast to the 100, do those T100 dungeons, complete everything in the game, and have a lot of fun. I have a fully updated default planner for you guys, going over the skills, the paragons, the items, everything you need to know, and also have the Maxwell guide for this made by Dioxide, linked in the description if you want to read up on his take and the written version. So here's the setup I made. I have a bunch of different variants down here, so you can check those out. I also have the overpower one-shot memes here. That was something from Season 2 that actually still exists, but I'm gonna go into that in a second. But for the most part, we have a pretty straightforward progression with this build. It's relatively easy to get the hang of it, but it has these elements that are, easy to learn, hard to master, like it's usually the case with many things here on the Rogue class. So the main concept of this build is that we run combo points. You use puncture to build them. You can also use, for example, Heartseeker if you want, but I suggest puncture at least. And every time you have 3 combo points, you shoot either penetrating shot or rapid fire, depending on the situation you're faced with. For AoE fights, penetrating shot is extremely powerful because you shoot into a pack, it goes through everything, and then with the trick shot aspect, you also get those side arrows. So you shoot into a pack, and the more targets there are, the more this will split and deal more AoE damage. So you can produce a lot of lucky hit effects, but more importantly, just deal more damage to more targets, hit more stuff, and it kind of scales with the density, which is really nice. And then once there's only a few targets left, or you're fighting like a boss, this is where rapid fire shines, because it has insane single target damage output. So you have a perfect combination of one AoE skill and one single target skill, and you just try to use them exactly depending on the situation. On top of this, we also have 2 mobility skills in there. So we have Dash and Shadow Step. Now, both of these are relatively optional, I would say, outside of proccing Tables Will. So this is the main activator, the Shadow Step, to activate those pants later in the late game. But they are optional. You don't have to go with them. You can go with a normal unique there, or normal legendary, I mean. And you don't have to do the Shadow Step stuff if you don't want to. But keep in mind, you have to change those pants. So there can be caltrops, there can be a smoke grenade, that's a really nice pick. You can even take a second or even a third imbuement if you really want to. You go much heavier on that. The build is fairly versatile here. And even concealment with the new resistant assailants aspect is feasible, I would say. So you can combine this with the new aspect, in case you have not seen this. It's this one that gives you a cooldown reset on your concealment every time you kill an elite. And like this, you can constantly go into concealment, get a guaranteed crit, for example, which is helpful to like proc your position passive, for example. Or you have the long vulnerable uptime there. And you can combine this with the Night Stalker glyph that gives you Shadow Imbuement resets, which we use naturally in this build. So whenever you press Shadow Imbuement and then follow up with a pen shot, you can blow up entire packs, because you instantly infect everything, and this AoE damage is usually enough to just deal with everything. But with that concealment Night Stalker combo I described, you can actually do this much more often if you want to, but then you have to run concealment. But in general, the skill tree looks like this here. So we have the puncture with the 3 blades and the vulnerable. It also has a slow, so it's like a really nice combo point building tool. We have a full investment in rapid fire and penetrating shot. They're both important damage abilities, so you want to make sure that you invest fully into them. We have the advanced rapid fire for the extra damage, and we have the improved penetrating shot that gives you a crit buff. Then we have the disciplined Shadow Step, gives you a shorter cooldown on Shadow Step, so you can use it much more often. We have the dash with the slow and the daze here, so that's kind of nice for extra CC effects. Here's Dark Shroud. So a lot of people always ask me about Dark Shroud. This is in the build because of the Umbrous aspect. So early game, you don't have this, it's not in the codex, but later on you want this aspect. It's a really nice, really powerful aspect, and this triggers Dark Shrouds for you without having it on the bar. So if you want, you can put it on the bar early on. I don't think that's really necessary, but just having these effects passively they're really good. You can get either 8% crit, which I chose here. You can also get 20% movement speed, which is also really nice. So both options are available. Then we have the Shadow Imbuement here that gives us vulnerable as well. So that's pretty good and knocks us some extra crit there. And mostly a few other passives here. So there's a lot of damage passives, Exploit, Malice. We have Weapon Mastery. Now, the thing is that this doesn't really benefit much for rapid fire. There's a bug here, but at least once you have a bow later on, then this is fine. It's only bugged with the crossbows. And yeah, you also have some other utility passives. There's Sturdy, the damage reduction, Stutter Step for speed. We have the knockdown here for crit, and the daze and the trigger attacks. So you get evade cooldown back, you get extra crit, and you knock them down to proc this here, which you can do with the Mangler aspect. So there's also a drop only aspect, but once you find this, it's a really powerful tool both for proccing these passives here. So this is something you pick up once you have Manglers basically. Or in T100 dungeons, there's also a smoke grenade. So I have this here. We don't have Manglers, we have damage reduction instead, but you have this. And this also gives you the daze to proc all these effects at once. So you want to make sure that you pick this up once you're there with this aspect. And down here we also have stuff like haste, extra movement speed, really nice. And finally precision. So precision got a major rework. What you need to know is that now you can stack up to 6 stacks, and you usually get 2 of them at a time using puncture when you have at least one of those knives crit. So at least later on, once you have a bit of crit chance, that will happen basically all the time. So you do 3 punctures, you get your full combo points, you get your full precision, and then you fire your spender, and it will consume the precision stacks and deal massive amounts of extra damage based on your critical strike damage. So this also makes this a very important stat that we stack a lot. As you can see here, this is actually before the buff to Sky Hunter in the upcoming patch. So we're gonna have something like above 800, like even close to 900% critical strike damage on this build, completely boosting precision passive through the roof and giving us a lot of extra damage because most of our attacks will be crits and you get tons of additive damage there. And as you can see here, the skill progression is actually pretty straightforward. Not really much changes when you swap around. It's only like in the early game, like up to level 50, I would say. There can be a few tweaks. As I mentioned, no Dark Shroud because you need the aspect. Also, like if you need Mangler for this cluster here, and instead we have, for example, some investment in consuming shadows. So before you get a bit of like resource generation and resource cost reduction, this is really powerful just to like shoot a shadow movement into the pack. Everything explodes, you have full resources and you keep going. So that makes it very smooth. There's also innovation, for example. You can even do impetus if you want. So a few extra damage passives, and then basically as you acquire either this or that aspect, you're just gonna start replacing things. And for T100 dungeons, it looks a bit different. Here I dropped the dash, and we have the Caltrops instead. Again, this is optional, but they are really powerful, like damage buff with the chill there as well. You can run Frigid Finesse now. And again, we have the smoke grenade here instead of the Shadow Imbue. For the high tier dungeons, like it's not really that important to go with the Shadow Imbuement anymore. It's not that powerful to just blow up packs necessarily. And this is just a really powerful, both offensive and defensive tool here that I can use very often. Now for your items, what you need to know is that there is one important aspect, the trick shot. I already described this, and then there's a few of those drop only aspects here, the defensive ones in particular that you care about. And a lot of this other stuff is mostly just like generic damage increases. We have like the synergy with combo points here with the expectant. We have the rapid for faster basic attacks. We have accelerating. We have edge masters. So all of this stuff is nothing really big. We just want to try to get as much of these generic damage increases. And in the late game, we have the Sky Hunter bow and Condemnation, and also Tibalt's Will. So those are the uniques that we're going for here. 40% extra damage, a bit of resources, really nice item. But again, if you don't want to do the Shadow Step stuff, you can replace it, or just if you're feeling too squishy. Then we have the Sky Hunter. This is a massively buffed item now. So it has much better stats, a lot of crit stats now. This is actually outdated right now. This is not the data mined new version now, so you've seen the old one, and also the effect has massively improved. So this is a really powerful weapon that you want to go for later. However, you can also go with a normal crossbow. If you can choose, you want to go for a crossbow, not for a bow, but Sky Hunter turns out to be so good that you want to go with the bow anyway. But if you don't have that, or you didn't find a good roll at least, go with a normal crossbow. If it has high item power, this is totally fine. And Condemnation, since this is a combo point build, is obviously extremely strong here. So the main effect to look out for is the extra damage based on the core points, and then stuff like the basic skill attack speed and the core skill damage here. While you still don't have those uniques, there is a replacement for some of these unique items here. So we have elements aspect instead of this coronation, for example. Here we have the Ghostwalker amulet on a necklace, and then we put edge masters on the weapon. So if you don't have any of those unique weapons here, you can make room for this here, and you can go double mobility aspect. So usually we have just only the Ravagers, and then we kind of like drop Ghostwalker as we go. But once you're like in the late game, level 100, full geared out, then you should be at capped or near capped movement speed all the time, even without Ghostwalker. So this is kind of the thought here. But if you want to go really fast all the time, you can also just keep this here. And for your star priorities, one important thing is you want to stack a bunch of armor. So once you are approaching like level 80 or so, you want to have your armor and your resistances capped. So try to hit 70% on all of them. You can do this with your gems, with a bunch of rolls on your gear, and then ultimately rid of the armor rolls here, just to be well protected against physical damage as well. In fact, this setup is actually built to have enough armor without even running disobedience aspect. You see it has 13.7k in the perfect best in slot gear, and like this you have permanent protection against everything really easily. You don't have to stack the buff up first to actually not get one tap from a corpse bow off screen or something. So this makes this a fairly safe build as well, but just try to keep an eye on your armor values and your resistance values as you level up, and especially in Torment difficulty. Other than that, you want to stack some defensive stats here on the chest. That should look like this. You want damage reduction, and then damage reduction from close and distant, and these kind of things. Just maybe life as well is fine. And kind of similar here, you want armor, you want maybe life. But if you don't feel like you need more life, there's stuff like basic skill attack speed, there's stuff like shadow imbuement ranks, resistances, etc. Boots should look like this as well, with a lot of resistances and some movement speed. That's really good. For your gloves, of course, the core skill ranks, you want to look for gloves that have both skills together. So kind of hard to find, but it's worth it. And then a bit of crit, a bit of attack speed. This is the optimal glove here. And for your rings, resources, really nice because it just makes the whole setup smoother. You can, fire faster, etc. Crit, then life and crit damage. Crit damage, as I mentioned, it scales the new precision passive, so you want to stack that where you can. Now with all these uniques, yeah, you can't really do this much on the weapons, but Sky Hunter actually brings a lot of extra critical strike damage, and that was actually buffed as well. It has even more critical strike damage now. So this is like a really great synergy with the precision passive, and then a weapon here like this. So let's jump into the Paragon setup here as well. So I have a relatively straightforward 6-board setup with 5 different glyphs, and I'm gonna walk you through this. So we start out here, we have a few glyph stops. So this is why I have the level 1 glyphs set up here. You can see how this looks when you start out, when you have nothing basically, as you level up your glyphs first, because at rank 15 they increase in radius. You have to swap them around a little bit. One thing that's kind of important early on is the exploit glyph. It's kind of nice just having the secondary bonus online here, so as soon as you can get that. And here we have, this can't even be activated. You can also put another placeholder glyph there if you want, something that scales with int or dex, that is possible. And then we have the pride glyph. I really like that one, gives you lots of extra burst damage against high health targets, which actually also just synergizes with this playstyle here, because you have a lot of ranks in exploit as well here. You see with the Sky Hunter bow you get a rank 9 exploit if you also put it on your neck. And like this, you have this insane burst against any kind of like trash monsters. Like it's very easy to one-shot stuff with penetrating shot shooting into a pack basically, and because of this. And Pride Glyphs helps with that as well. There's the chip that gives you extra physical damage. This is mostly a physical build with a bit of shadow. And here's the combat glyph. So I put this quite late in the progression, but early on you might not have enough of the crit chance. Actually, by the way, the sun is coming in right now, but what can you do? So this is why the combat glyph comes kind of late, and I have this down here, but this is totally fine. It doesn't matter all too much to have this very early. And as for important Paragon nodes, so there's only 2 legendary nodes that we picked here, which is the cheap shot board. This is kind of just like on the way. Sometimes gives you a bit of a damage buff when you slow enemies with puncture, or with your companion as well, like new construct that can also slow for you. And down here at the end, we put Cunning Stratagem. So Cunning Stratagem gives you a non-damage combo point bonuses, like a buff version So this means that when you have 3 comp points, instead of 8 arrows, you're gonna shoot 9 with rapid fire, and instead of 80% lucky hit, you're gonna have 90% lucky hit with pen shot. So for pen shot, this is not too relevant, but it does help with some things like the ambush aspect, but it's most important for the single target damage for rapid fire, so that's why this is picked. But on the way, you also pick up a lot of other really good stuff. There's a lot of like damage and damage reduction nodes, some armor nodes here, there's life here and res, so it's kind of easy to cap resistances here. You see this is kind of overcapped anyway, and you could even remove some of those resistances here if you want. In the end, you can like min-max and tweak this a little bit. And finally, let's go over the construct here. So this is a fairly straightforward setup. I like to go with the gyrate and melee attack, like that's an AoE whirl. Well, we don't really know exactly how well all of this stuff will work. This is recorded before the season launch, so we'll see. Maybe there's going to be some surprises, but for now I just went with like a pretty straightforward setup here. So we have the slow support. Slowing enemies is pretty useful on any rogue build, because many rogue builds, or pretty much all of them, run with vials with the damage reduction from slowed enemies, and you have more damage reduction here, and it's just kind of helpful. The proc effects like this here, damage to crowd control, for example. There's efficiency, 15% extra crit chance once this is maxed out. This is really powerful. And I put initiative there for the teleport. And here's Flash of Adrenaline, just a damage buff, I don't know how much. And longer duration, shorter cooldown, a bit of Fortify. I just put a Fortify in there because it's free damage reduction for rogues, so why not? Now finally, I talked about this at the start when I went over the planner. So we have this overpower boss one-shot setup. This is mostly just something that spawned out of a meme that I did, where I was one-tapping a world boss with like 220 million life. Okay, you guys ready? Back in season 2, but it's also with the Tibble's Willbug. But even without the Tibble's Willbug giving you lots of combo points, this is a pretty powerful setup, and I'll tweak that a bit further. So the idea here is that you can do nothing in the game besides, you know, do like a funny uber little one-shot clip or something like that. That's quite possible for sure. Even Duriel, you can probably do something like a chunk of his, like probably like almost his entire health bar actually. So yeah, you can do some pretty crazy stuff with the setup, and you get this overpower synergy from Banishal's Talisman, and then you activate all your stuff like the Godslayer Crown, and then you have your position passive, you have your Tricks of the Trade, legendary Paragon node, go into concealment, have the Cultures up, and then, you know, let's do like one big burst. You know. It's just in there if in case you want to do any kind of fancy stuff like this, but keep in mind this is much weaker now without the Tibble's Willbug. So good enough for Lilith, not good enough for World Boss. And lastly, I want to talk about the Uber Uniques real quick. There's not really all too much to put into this build here, but we have the Shaco. I think that the Shaco is really powerful. And we also have the Starless Sky, it's also really powerful unique now. That was heavily buffed, gives you like lots of extra damage now. So you can kind of like just replace stuff like the Manglers, and I think I replaced like Edge Masters or something for this one. So you have to give up some relatively good powers here, but I think the payoff is good enough. And if you really want, if you want to be more tanky, you can also throw in a Doombringer here, but it may not be necessary once you have this entire setup. Only keep in mind that when you swap to those uniques, you might have to like also change some stuff around with resistances. For example, here Shaco doesn't have res, but this regular helm does have, so that's something to keep in mind. And that also concludes this guide here, so I hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck in season 3 with the Rogue. Personally, I'm very excited to play some Pen RF yet again after doing all this like Albatross Zia blasting and a lot of like trying it out in season 2 in various, you know, contents and various stages. So it's just really fun, and now with the buffs to ranged rogues, precision, the Sky Hunter, it's gonna feel real good. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you too. And I'll see you guys next time.